Let's try that again. Because, of course we do. If it doesn't crash at least once. Am I really trying to live stream? Doubtful. Alright. I wonder if I can cancel that other one somehow. Nope. Whatever. We'll go to that one then. There we go.
I'm the Loch Superintendent of Lochmora. This is my 25th season in the Loch. I came for the weekend, believe it or not. Never got away again. But I like it. I love it here. It's absolutely stunning.
But last summer, it wasn't just the view that captivated Viv.
Some very believable people have told me the monster exists. And I spend a lot of hours out in that loch. You know, many thousands of hours a year out there. Well, up until this summer, I'd never seen anything that would even make me, think there could be something there. My daughter and I were driving on the far side of the loch, and there's a high point just before you drop down where you see the loch for the first time at the back of the islands. And the loch was like a mirror. I mean, just like an absolutely not a ripple on it at all. And my daughter said, "What's that out there, Daddy?" And I looked out across the loch, and there were these two things. I did take a photograph of them. So they were travelling towards the islands, doing, at a guess, 10, 12 knots. Never seen anything like it on the loch before. But they were creating the weirdest wash I've ever seen. It wasn't like a boat wash. There wasn't the big V coming off it, but there was huge disturbance on the surface. I mean, I've seen hundreds of boats out there. I know what they look like. You can still see the land, so if it was a boat, surely it would show up as clearly as that. I had my binoculars with me, and it definitely wasn't kayakers. Something very big, and just under the surface. I'll show you on the map where. So, my daughter and I were up about there on the track, and then as we drove down the hill, they disappeared, and there wasn't a ripple left in the water. But I say my daughter's convinced. There's no doubt in her mind whatsoever. This is the monster.
Was it the monster? One thing is certain. These strange waves on the surface of the water left Viv shaken.
Who knows? There it is.
Left Viv shaken.
Who knows? So as I say, it's the only thing in nearly 25 years that made me think, I'm not so sure. But I mean, it's been seen for hundreds of years. It's not a myth. I mean, it has been seen. Some of the old local people have seen it loads of times, and there's no reason to say they've seen it. They're not getting anything out of it at all. It's not being commercialised. Who knows?
Morar is a tiny village of 250 souls on the shores of the lake that bears its name, 5 kilometers or approximately 3 miles from Scotland's Atlantic coast. It is the second to last stop on the scenic West Highlands Railway that ends its journey in Mallaig, a quaint fishing village that has long been an important market for the inhabitants of Morar.
I'm Malcolm Poole. I work as curator to the local museum, Mallaig Heritage Centre. Born and brought up here, and that's about it, basically. Well, it's never been, prime farming area. Very shallow land, much of it covered with heather. It's very rough country. It certainly meant that people in the area had to look to the sea, and that's, I think, probably been a factor in people's lives ever since humans first came into the area. The railway to Mallaig reached here in 1901, and from being a very small crofting and fishing community, it suddenly became an important through route for 70, 80 years. The prosperous period was in the 1970s when modern fishing methods were bringing in of herring. but that wasn't sustainable. And the herring markets moved elsewhere. The herring fishery here never recovered.
An economic shock that is still being felt in the region and that helped give certain areas their deserted appearance.
By European standards, a very sparsely populated region. Over the last 150 years, things have changed quite a lot. People move west. They're no longer the scattering of little settlements of 2 or 3 families all around Lochmorder that there were in the middle of the 19th century. Most of those have been abandoned. Lochmorder itself is actually one of the deepest freshwater in Europe. The eastern end, it actually plunges to nearly 1,000 feet, which is a depth that you don't reach until you're well out into the Atlantic. It is a large area of water with very few people dwelling around it to see what goes on, so who knows?
In this small corner of Scotland, where there are no strangers, the elders love to share their stories of the monster.
My name is Ewan MacDonald and I am retired. Oh, this is about 10, 15 years ago, at least. Oh, maybe more, 20 years ago. Two of my gentlemen were out fly fishing on the loch, and this thing appeared in the middle of the loch. 2 white whales going down the loch. And then a head arose out of it, and it sort of moved itself around. Then the head went down and everything disappeared. We just didn't know what the heck it was. I've seen it again out here, up at the back of these islands there. There's 2 of us were in a motorboat, you know, in a boat bigger than that. And we seen this wake on top of the water. It was a calm day, pretty calm day. It was a wake in this water. What the heck's that? Led the boat up and followed this wake, and we could see it in the shallow water, swimming away like this. And then once it reached the deep water, disappeared. Your hair stands on end, the back of your neck, you see. You feel sort of, that's something that's unusual, something you've never seen before. It makes you feel, I don't know. That's been seen a few times by quite a number of people.
The final witness on the list is Kathleen McNeil. While she was at her parents' cottage, she saw a strange creature on the lake. It could only be the morag.
Well, I was up here when I took the photo. I just came like over here, and I stood here and I took it from here. I was just lucky to be here at the right time with a camera. Yeah. So I was one of the lucky ones. A lot of people don't have proof. I have lived here all my life. You couldn't get a nicer place. Ever since I was born, I've been hearing stories about this. And I was desperate to see something, but I hadn't. So I was just so excited and a wee bit overwhelmed. I couldn't believe my eyes, really. There was a couple staying here at my mum's bed and breakfast, and they were sitting out just on the deck enjoying the views, and they shouted in for us to come out because they had seen something in the water. So I ran out, and just directly down there was two black humps. They were quite large. Probably, to me, they looked about that size each one, just in the water down there. So when I came running out and I had my camera and I shouted my dad to come out to see, and I managed to take a couple of photos.
They actually came in and shouted for us to come out and have a look.
Hello.
And my daughter Kathleen came out and looked. And she had a phone, she took a photo of it, and I was shortly behind her. And that's when I saw like two humps.
It was black. To me, it looked like each hump was about that. And the loch was just like glass, very flat. And as soon as they started going under the water again, there was a lot of wake and a lot of movement in the water, just round about the area where they were. So it was obviously something very large.
Approximately, it was a third of the way out, you know. So they thought it was a whale at first, but you don't get whales in fresh water. Certainly that day there was something, that's what I keep saying.
I think when I was describing it to a few people, it was kind of similar to what they had seen many years back.
There's been a lot of sightings obviously, and I think some people are embarrassed to say they saw morag or saw something that looked like morag.
They said it must have been the monster, because it was the same thing that they had seen.
The descriptions of the creature vary from one story to another, but we usually hear of a body measuring between 6 and 12 meters, or approximately 20 to 40 feet, a serpentine head. The creature is capable of traveling at high speeds on the surface of the water, its several humps protruding as it goes.
Center stage, time to shine. Roots are flawless by design with Clairol root touch-up. Spray, brush, dye. These sprays goodbye. It's a full collection for root perfection. Clairol. It's so me.
You can do this. You can be the first millennial in history who took a trip on a device that is not their computer. How? Yeah, how? I need a big screen to feel safe. Kayak. They compare hundreds of sites, so you know you're getting the right flight, hotel, or rental car. I'm scared. We'll do it together.
Kayak. Got that right.
Need him to dry, and then it's top.
The first credible sighting to catch the public eye occurred in 1969, when the fishing boat of William Simpson and Duncan MacDonald was nearly capsized by the monster.
Duncan passed away there a few months ago. A few months prior to that, we did speak about the monster, and he did mention that when they were coming back from a fishing trip up the loch, himself and Willie, in Willie's boat, they got an awful fright. I think it was around about the islands here. Something struck the boat. It kind of listed the boat over. Duncan says, and when he looked to see what it was, and this thing popped up, and it was like a big eel's. The neck was like a big eel with a face, big face, he was saying. And they struck it with the oar, and they struck it that hard, they broke the oar. And after that, the thing just disappeared to the depth, they said. It's only a few months before he died. I can't remember what they were speaking about, and he mentioned this, which makes me believe it kind of changed my mind from a big joke to, yes, there could be. So, definitely confirms there's something there.
At the time, a young man captivated by nature wanted to know more. He shared with us the impact the fishing incident had on him.
I'm Adrian Shine. I'm a naturalist. I've now worked on this subject for about 41 years. I began in 1973. Towards the end of the 60s, something rather special happened at Lochmora. Their boat was allegedly rammed with a water beast of some sort, a big one. And it made the news, and I read about it. I actually have the newspaper article. It said, 60-foot monster attacks Loch boat. And the story, inevitably, went worldwide. Some people from the Loch Ness investigation came over to Lochmora, investigated that sighting, that particular event, and then ran a series of expeditions, 1970, 71, 72. And one of their members wrote a book called The Search for Morag. This book is actually full of sightings, about 40 of them. There are two conflicting stereotypes. There is the multi-hump form, and there is the long-necked, shorter-bodied form. They very seldom appear together. And that's when I took things very seriously indeed.
The picturesque village of Morar developed following the arrival of the railroad in 1901. But today, it is an extremely quiet hamlet.
This is the village of Morar.
A guided tour with one of its illustrious residents, Alistair MacLeod, former city councillor and one-time proprietor of the village's only hotel.
The village is basically one street. It used to be the main road going through here, but the highway has bypassed it, and now you have a situation where it is only local traffic that is coming through. Well, this is a Morar railway station, and at one time it was a very busy station. We had a post office that sat there, and a little shop back here on the right. Because the village had been bypassed with the road, the post office closed and so did the shop. And the effects of that were felt in the hotel. And the hotel, of course, was built at the coming of the railway in 1901. I was 30 years the proprietor of the hotel. With it being the centre of the village here, we did all the weddings. And the christenings and funerals and things like that. So sometimes the only time you met people was at one of those functions, and it was wonderful to have that.
There I am.
It was here, in this hotel, that villagers met to talk about the Morag. And of course, the former owner of the place also had a story to tell.
I was out fishing on Loch Morar with a cousin of mine and his 2 daughters. I would reckon now it would be about 20 years ago. And it was a beautiful, calm evening, and we were sitting in the boat. And about 100 yards away, an object appeared from out of the water. It looked to me like the back of a bull. It was hairy, which caused it to be shiny when the water went on it. I immediately started up the engine of the boat to head towards it. I wanted to investigate myself what this was, the 2 girls. And they got very frightened and they were shouting they didn't want to go, but I wanted to investigate once and for all what
That's why
was
we
there.
were longer
And when
than
I
that.
arrived, submerged in the water, and there was nothing there but a black whirlpool.
Crispy boy season has arrived. Bud Light, easy call.
What can you do with cricket?
No need to rush the room. I keep it clean, keep the clothes cold. Eyes won't go. I don't chase, I choose. And I know what I want. Yeah, I know what I want. One step and I'm gone. Watch me, watch me, watch me. Make it, make it, make it, make it, make it, make it. That's how I'm.
That's what you can do with cricket.
Make it, cricket.
Whirlpool. So I stopped the boat on top of it and looked down into the water, but we saw nothing. I can only tell you what I saw. Over the years, many people have saw the monster here and have never spoke about it because it's just one of these things. People laugh. Some people that have never saw it don't believe in it, and the people who do see it very often they say nothing.
The myth of the Morag goes back centuries. At one time, the mere mention of the monster was considered a bad omen.
There's been tales about it ever since I was born. I've been hearing stories about the monster. The older generation, a lot of them, they thought it was bad luck. People said if they'd seen the monster, something bad would happen to their family.
As I grew up hearing about the monster, it was called locally the Vorach. Some people said it was a sign of the death of a particular member of a particular family. Some people said it was the Gillises, some people said it was the Macdonnells. It wouldn't necessarily mean that a local Macdonnell or Gillis had died. It could be somebody in Nova Scotia or even Quebec, a descendant of the people of Moray.
Like Nessie, Morag's history goes back to the early Irish monks came to the west coast of Scotland bringing the Christian religion, and she's been reported at various points during history.
It is said that St. Columba, the man that brought Christianity to Scotland, walked on the top of the mountains here, the 8th or 9th century probably. He looked down and he referred to the beastie in Loch Morar, that there was a monster, and even in these days. That would make the monster quite old, is right.
I suspect it's also tangled up with Celtic mythology as well. Echusha, or water horse, which appears frequently in Celtic mythology.
You see, there was a widespread folklore tradition in the Highlands of Scotland. Tales of the Kelpie or water horse, which actually used to devour travellers, dragging them into the water. A very bad thing, an evil thing, in league with the devil. But even to speak of it suggested that you might be part of the evil. So there was a strong superstition against mentioning encounters and unusual things seen in Scottish lochs.
But today, the monster has lost much of its evil reputation.
But as areas became more cosmopolitan, so these sorts of stories became relegated to warning stories for children, to keep children away from the water, which is a sensible thing.
A lot of people also joke around and say that they only see it if they've had too much whiskey. But there is good tales about her as well, and other people said she was good luck. I'm not sure what to believe, to be honest. I suppose I've had a good year, yeah. I got married and yeah, it's been good. So I'm hoping it's good luck since I've seen her.
In 1973, Adrian Shine came to these banks in order to investigate the monster of Loch Morar. At that time, no one had solved the mystery of the Morag, and the desire to capture this monster has become an obsession that has monopolized his time for many years.
At that time, I was a very young man. Quick fame and fortune awaited this national wildlife, natural
There should
history
be food in
problem.
your dish.
Could I solve it? Could I be the one to solve it? I knew that aquatic creatures rise towards the surface at night. So then the place to be is in a little boat, and the time to be there is at night. And I rowed around Loch Morar, drifting at night in the hope of attracting an encounter. I was rowing along in the dusk, and all of a sudden there cruised out into the body of the loch a hump, a big hump. I stopped rowing, it stopped, and I began to push on the oars to get closer. And it stopped looking like this great hump, and it began to look like a huge semi-submerged head. Ripples broke away from it as it started to move towards me.
Was it the chance of a lifetime?
The moment of truth. Had to cough. Suspense. And it was a rock, 2 inches, 3 inches high. And those ripples that broke away from it were actually the wake of my boat having passed it. I learned that night, there is no such thing as a sighting which does not have an alternative explanation. But of course, we don't know whether all the alternative explanations are true. It only takes one of these sightings to be of an unknown animal for the whole issue to change.
Adrian Shine had no luck this time. But the residents of Loch Morar have been on the lookout for decades, and the mystery continues.
Easy to style, easy to wear. Shop trendy prescription glasses for men and women at Vermoon.
My name is Alistair McKellig. I'm involved in the fishing industry. Lived in this small village of Malig all my life. As I say, my brother saw it. My 2 younger sons were aboard the boat. We all saw the same thing. Well, we're just out in a local fishing competition, which we regularly have in Loch Morar, and totally flat calm, not a movement in the loch. My brother turned round and said to me, "Do you see these 3 humps in the water?" And as we turned round, we saw 3 humps. And of course, we didn't have any camera aboard the boat at the time, but someone made a sketch just on the evidence that we're hearing. But it's a good representation of what we saw. We normally fish, maybe it's only 7 yards from the shore, very close in. We saw this 3 humps, maybe 50 yards behind the boat. And the humps came basically alongside the boat, past the boat, and totally disappeared. Where we saw this creature, or whatever, it's the deepest area of the loch. I think it's 330 metres deep. There was no boats close by us. The nearest boats were probably 4 or 5 miles from us, so, and it was just a strange feeling. We couldn't explain what the movement was in the water and why it suddenly disappeared. Our local newspaper passed the story on to the national press. In fact, front page of the paper it was as well. Then it just went from one newspaper to the next over the next few weeks. It says, lock up your loved ones. Run for your lives. She's scary, she's slimy, and she's back. The terrible creature of Mora has surfaced again. You know, we don't know if it's one creature or maybe more. We don't know if everyone's seen the same thing. Yeah, that's still a mystery. But I know there's something there.
But Adrian Shine did not quit. Given the abundance of testimony, he decided to continue hunting the monster and refining his research tools.
One of the things that I noticed, but at Loch Mora, when I looked over the side of that rowing boat, the water was very clear. And I thought I shouldn't be sitting around waiting up here. I should be sitting around waiting down there. And so over the winter,
He's foolish, but I like him.
1973 to 74, I built a small submersible observation chamber to look upwards against the surface in the hope of seeing a great silhouette swim over the top, because that a large predator might patrol along the shallow water. We could stay in there for about 2 hours, and I had a camera, of course, in there, and we baited it to attract fish, and of course we hoped something larger. And yes, we saw lots of fish. We didn't see any large creatures. And then the next year, in 75, we thought that there might be some skeletal remains. Maybe if an air breather had died, it might have come close inshore to make breathing easier. And so I built a little glass-bottomed boat, which we surveyed all the shallows, 200 miles of shallows around Loch Mora.
Residents still remember the crazy exploits of the young scientist.
When I first met him, it was 41 years ago. He was admired for the amount of work that he put in looking for this. And he's probably spent a lifetime doing it. And he's still looking for something. I hope he finds it before he goes to the happy hunting ground. They probably point him in the right direction when he gets up above.
This is the way to where I used to have a base camp during the 1970s. It was after I'd used the little submarine. My expeditions had got a little bigger. I had some logistic support from elements of the British Army. We've had up to 100 people on this site, but that was a long time ago now. We came here because it was flat ground, a good launching beach for the assault boats of the Royal Engineers, which used to take my crews down the loch with the underwater television. We were not successful with that. It was fun, they were great days, and a lot of it happened right here.
Despite decades of research, Adrian Shine was never able to prove beyond a doubt the Morag's existence. He has even grown skeptical over the years, but as a scientist, he strikes to keep an open mind. And he never hesitates to return to the loch. After all, who knows?
I've known Adrian for a few years now. He is a non-believer in the monster, but he wants to prove scientifically that it's not there.
Sometimes some of the scientists that I work with would like to come and do work here, and so we come and Vivian helps us. And he is on the loch in the course of his duties a great deal. And so if there's one man who understands this loch, it's going to be Vivian Dufresne.
What proofs are in that cache ready to go?
Together, Adrian Shine and Viv Dufresne combine over 50 years of experience on the loch. And today, he returns to track down the monster.
By integrating everything into agency analytics, it does become our all-in-one dashboard. You know, I can't remember the last time I actually went into Google Analytics or Google Search Console or, you know, here or there. Our team now just looks at our campaigns, we look at our clients, we go to agency analytics to see how things are performing. I think that's actually overcome our demand for reporting. You know, the reports now are just automated, they go out. I don't even notice it, I don't even realize it anymore. It's just more of our day-to-day dashboards that we're looking at in agency analytics.
Real quick, if your fat loss supplement isn't activating thermogenesis as probably not doing much.
It's probably just the monster.
I was here each summer from 1973 until 79. We did come here in the winter actually as well. I did some diving here in the winter. We were bloody mad then. It was cold.
Did you see the pictures in the paper from the bed and breakfast last summer? We were staying in one of the bed and breakfasts just along here. We got a very bad photograph of the monster. They were on the sun deck or something, so it would have been out here somewhere.
What did you make of that?
It's certainly in a deep bit of the loch. It's not a rock, and it is something large on the surface.
Viv Dufresne was a die-hard skeptic until one day in the summer of 2014 when strange waves appeared on the loch.
I carved away
To the
the
exact
jaw.
spot where this strange phenomenon
I put the
occurred.
teeth on the inside, and then I built the other side.
See where the dip in the plantation there?
Yes.
That's where it was, just on the right-hand side of that. Whatever it was this side of that point, between that point and this point of the island. I'd love an explainable answer. So I can go back to Mr. Total Skeptic again.
But for Malcolm Poole, director of the Mallaig Heritage Centre, Scottish lake monsters are the stuff of legend.
One quite plausible explanation for some sightings are driftwood, and giant eels have been mentioned as a possible explanation as well. To be honest, deer are at the top of my list. They've been photographed swimming considerable distances from the shore to feed on the islands. So that is a possible explanation.
And we surveyed in 1975 200 miles of the shoreline, and we went all the way around the shore looking for skeletal remains using a little glass-bottom boat. An awful lot of sheep and deer bones, but
I like the
we
orange.
didn't find anything unusual. We're looking for the sorts of things that people see, and sometimes believe they're seeing large animals. Perhaps they are, and perhaps they're not. Things like boatways, things like what we're generating now, but it's disappearing. The waves we are making can sometimes look like those multi-humps, what I call the sea serpent type sightings. That can happen.
Adrian and Viv are en route to the place where there have been the most sightings.
I mean, most of the ones I've heard of recently are down this end, it has to be said, but then not so many people go further up the loch now.
No, it can be a dangerous place.
Well, the canoeists that we lost last summer, it was blowing worse than this, and they were up at the head of the loch, and one of them drowned.
And it can happen so quickly too.
Yep.
It can really happen quickly. You've always got to have an escape plan.
It can change in a second.
Yes.
I mean, you're not even seeing half of the length of it here. The sunlight on the hill and the distance there, that's about halfway up the loch. So you've got the same again before you get to the top of it.
A large area of water with mountains around. The wind does play tricks on the water, and on a number of occasions I've seen things that made me look closer, but I always came up with an explanation for strange patterns on the water.
Because we're lying in the shelter of an island, the wind comes over the top and strikes down onto the water, and we call that a cat's paw, and that can happen. There's one, there's one. But if you were on the shore now and high up, you might see that as an animal surfacing and coming towards you with a wake. There are all sorts of things that water does which can be mysterious. There's as much rationality as imagination that goes into what people see. There's generally something that they are seeing. It's just a question of how we interpret it.
Adrian Shine and Viv Dufresne are still on the hunt for the Morag.
behind you.
Just keep your eyes open.
Well, Ewan and John McVarish reckoned they saw one in the islands here when they were fishing. And it was very calm, and they saw it under the water and shot off into the deep.
Yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
This is it. It takes some doing, doesn't it?
But chasing a lake monster is a bit like fishing. It's best to be patient and enjoy your time outdoors.
Building the schedule, managing employee availability, and time off. There's so much that can keep you stuck in the back instead of doing what you love. At When I Work, we've got your back office. So you can get back to running your business and get shift done.
Putting off that new deck? At Kent, there are options to fit every budget. Find it cheaper? We'll match it. So stop shopping around and start building. This summer, build the deck you've been waiting for. Kent, look what we've built together.
Look at that rock down there. That's
big rock.
As far as I'm concerned, we've succeeded really well.
What else do I have to work with? Oh, here's the balloon I'm looking for.
Another hugely successful day. But if you saw her every day, it wouldn't be a mystery anymore.
No, that's right. The popularity of these mysteries lies partly in the attempts made to investigate them. And investigators sometimes have results. And sometimes, of course, the results are less mysterious.
Although many residents say they saw Morag, Adrian Shine now believes that this monster is a product of the imagination.
We are confident now that the multi-humps, the multiple hump sightings, are actually boat wakes, described as dark. Sometimes the skin is described as shiny, as in reflective, as in wet.
It was a dark colour, dark greyish black colour.
It was black, dark.
It was definitely dark grey or black. It was dark colours.
But then it often would be, because when you look at water, which often is reflecting light, silvery light, you see anything against that background, it will always appear dark, though it can also be characteristic of waveforms. Reports of size vary. The size here has been suggested as some 30 feet or more.
It was two large humps. To me, it looked like each hump was about that.
The total length of the humps may have been, I'm sure we've got to talk about 20 feet or 6 metres.
You know, the circumference they got in it.
I'll say between 6 and 20 feet.
We need context to judge size. In fact, the context that we require is distance. We can judge distance if we are on a textured surface, one like a patterned carpet, for example, but also if we are looking at waves, because the waves are a sort of pattern. As they recede, as the range increases, so the waves get smaller visually. And so that gives us a rough idea of distance and therefore size of scale. And guess when sightings are made?
And it was a beautiful, calm evening and totally flat calm, not a movement in the loch.
And the loch was just like glass, very flat.
And the loch was like a mirror. I mean, just like an absolutely not a ripple on it at all.
Seen this wake on top of the water. It's a calm day, pretty calm day. It's a wake in this water. What the heck's that?
And that's what makes it harder to explain, because it was so obvious what we saw.
And if you have no clues to distance, you will not know how big an unrecognized object is. Is it conceivable that a bird with a neck so big could actually be mistaken for a monster with a neck so big? These are explanations which are possible alternatives, though it doesn't necessarily mean the explanation is true.
But Adrian Shine's love of Loch Morar, to which he has devoted decades of his life, continues unchanged.
Okay, Claire. I wonder if I can shut it off. Okay, it's gonna have to crash on its own then.
Life continues unchanged. Now that he no longer believes in the monster, he's determined to prove it doesn't exist.
What I did was to try and use the conventional scientific techniques to examine the environment, all the organisms at the very base of the food chain. And the conclusion has been
Thanks for the thumbs up. I appreciate that.
Both at Loch Morar and at Loch Ness, that there is not really sufficient food resources to sustain a viable, resident population of large predators. It does not, of course, preclude the possibility of large creatures possibly coming from the sea. Loch Morar is actually closer to the sea than Loch Ness, but there's a problem there. And it is the fact that you've got a dam and a waterfall at the base of the River Morar, which feeds into the sea, and a bit of a barrier for larger marine creatures like seals, like sturgeon, to come into it.
But the full weight of science means very little to those who have seen the Morag with their own eyes.
What do I have for faces? Is this face? You're wet. You're wet. I have two faces.
Watching artists and makers less talented than you succeed while you're barely surviving.
What do you think?
Yeah, that stings.
Brown
I'm gonna say something
or
that
yellow?
might hurt, but you need to hear it. The reason you're not making consistent sales, it has nothing.
But the full weight of science means very little to those who have seen the Morag with their own eyes. And remember, there are many such witnesses.
So I do definitely believe in the monster. Thanks. There's definitely something there.
That day, what we saw that day, it didn't convince me there is Morag there, but there is something there. There's definitely something there. It's
Prior to me seeing it, I would probably be like everybody else and say that there wasn't such a thing at all.
I'm not a total believer in the monster angle. I think there could be something there. Well, there's obviously something there. I got a picture of it, but I don't know what it was.
And that's what makes it harder to explain. It was so obvious what we saw.
The more you speak to people that saw something, the more I believe there is something there.
Things like this are probably better undiscovered. We'd take all the mystery out of it if there definitely was one and we'd discovered it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with yellow.
We don't know if it's one creature or maybe more. We don't know if everyone's seen the same thing. Yeah, that's still a mystery.
But I mean, it's been seen for hundreds of years. It's not a myth. I mean, it has been seen. Some of the old local people have seen it, and there's no reason to say they've seen it.
See what I
Not
can
getting
find
anything
for
out of
yellow.
it at all. It's not being commercialised.
Loch Ness immediately optimized the sightings to become quite promotional in their attitude. That was not true at Loch Morar.
Soft green.
Monster or myth? One thing is certain, the people of Morar do not want to turn their village into an amusement park.
I wouldn't like to see Morar become a Loch Ness. It's a beautiful place to live, and it's very peaceful. And we're quite happy to keep it that way.
In the summer, we get tourists, but not even then, not like Loch Ness or something. You've got thousands and busloads of them everywhere, you know. And I wouldn't really like Loch Morar to become like that. I would not like seeing it commercialised like it has been at Loch Ness. Although we've got our little
It's awful.
We can keep it our little secret.
Maybe I'm being selfish, but when you love a place, you want to keep it all to yourself, basically. Isn't that right?
Most of the tourist trade is in summer, but you get a small number of people drifting through in winter as well. People just come here for hill walking. A few miles to the north of us, we've got three peaks that are over 3,000 feet, which attract a lot of mountaineers.
There's blue in there, so maybe I'll pull some blue out.
Out to the islands, white beaches to make you think you're in the Caribbean when the weather's a bit brighter than today.
It's the main beaches for this part of the country, right about here. The waters are very safe, very warm as well, and very beautiful, as you can see.
And for now, the steam train remains the most popular tourist attraction.
In 1984, the railway company tried a special steam service between Fort William and Malé, but it became world famous when it was used in the Harry Potter films. And now we have hundreds of people every day just to travel across the viaduct that figures in the films.
As for Adrian Shine, he has since devoted his research to the Loch Ness Monster.
And that's what led to Operation Deep Scan in 1987, which was a very large expedition. We did sonar patrols, and we did get a series of contacts that we didn't understand. Just because I don't understand my sonar contacts doesn't mean they're monsters, it might just mean that I don't understand.
And a new theory is gaining popularity on the Loch. What if Morag and Nessie of Loch Ness are the same creature?
Somebody did mention in the past that they're making out there's a big tunnel below the hill to Loch Ness.
Because both lochs run parallel to each other, they thought there could be maybe tunnels connecting the two lochs.
And we could be having a sheer monster here.
They thought it could be the monster from Loch Ness that had come into Loch Mora.
That's one theory. I mean, I've heard the theory, but it's certainly not one. It's a long way to have a tunnel. It's not long, I mean, it would have to be one hell of a tunnel.
No, I don't believe that for 1 minute.
But as far as I'm led to believe, there was inconclusive, so we've got a Mora monster and a Loch Ness monster at this stage.
I suppose you could say this, that if a lot of people, a lot of honest and sober people see large animals, and we go and look and find large animals, that's not a big deal. If a lot of people see large animals in a large Scottish loch and there are not animals there, then that is more interesting, not less.
You do, I guess. Work with what we got, and what we got is not a lot right now, so.
Why just color when you can color strong with Clairol? Our breakthrough bonding system helps reinforce hair structure for multi-dimensional color and 100% gray coverage with zero ammonia.
Clairol is so big.
What's that?
It was 10 o'clock a.m. on June 23rd, 2025, and a search team was combing a shallow gulch which runs southwest of missing hiker Monica Reza's last known position. The crew was about 700 feet down the gentle slope when someone spied a splash of color amidst the grays and browns of the rocky terrain. And as they drew closer, it became clear what they were looking at. It was a bright red beanie, which perfectly matched the one seen in pictures from that day, when it was tucked loosely into the missing woman's belt as she made her way down the Upper West Ridge Trail from the summit of Waterman Mountain in Angeles National Forest. First, that looked like great news. It had been just 25 hours since someone last made contact with the missing 60-year-old. They had a thermal-equipped helicopter flying overhead, and now they had a good idea of which direction she might have gone. Equally as important, they were confident that she was equipped to survive at least that long in the mountains just northeast of Los Angeles, California, having last been seen wearing a jacket, long pants, and a backpack with snacks and plenty of water. Monica was also an experienced hiker, familiar with the area in which she was lost, and should have been well aware that she had accidentally found herself on the wrong side of the ridge. Even better, a creek at the bottom of the slope formed a natural boundary mark and provided a source of fresh water, placing her in what was essentially a confined search area. So long as she hadn't fallen victim to one of the area's several natural predators, it should have been a matter of time until they found and rescued her. The search for Monica Reza lasted a week, during which time teams from Altadena, Antelope Valley, Malibu, San Dimas, Sierra Madre, San Diego, Ventura County, Riverside Mountain Rescue Unit, and the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, as well as teams from Orange County and San Bernardino County, scoured the landscape for miles in every direction surrounding Monica's last known position. And a helicopter equipped with state-of-the-art search and rescue technology scanned the mountainsides for 6 miles south of the turnoff. All told, searchers covered hundreds of miles along trails, roads, creeks, drainages, and essentially anywhere they thought that Monica might have gone. They never found anything more than that beanie. The fact that Monica somehow vanished from a place she knew well, despite helicopters making it into the air within mere hours of her disappearance, is not, however, the only thing that makes this story so strange. 8 months after Monica seemingly evaporated from that trail, while in view of the highway she would have been heading towards, retired U.S. Air Force Major General William Neal McCasland disappeared after leaving his home in Albuquerque, New Mexico on February 27, 2026. Now, that alone wouldn't be all that strange, but for 2 small details. William McCasland and Monica Reza spent a decade of their respective careers working on rocketry projects together, and they were not the first people associated with that field to go missing over the last few years. In fact, as I was sitting down to finalize this script, a news notification popped up on my phone with a simple yet ominous headline. White House directs FBI to investigate disappearance of missing scientists. All 11 of them.
Kayak smart filters help me find the perfect hotel room.
You see me sad.
What can you do with Cricket?
No need to brush the comb. I keep it clean, keep it close. Cold eyes, want gold. I don't chase, I choose. And I know what I want. Yeah, I know what I want. One step and I'm gone. Watch me, watch me, watch me. Think it, make it, think it, make it, think it.
That's what you can do with Cricket.
Think it, make it,
Cricket.
You're watching Northern Crimes.
I've spent years tracking down the dark histories from Alaska and the Yukon to the Pacific Northwest. But if you follow the coastline to the easternmost edge of the continent, you reach a place where isolation isn't just a setting, it's a way of life. Newfoundland and Labrador. It's a province defined by rugged beauty and a fierce community spirit forged by centuries of battling the Atlantic. But it's also a place where secrets can stay buried, where evidence is eroded by wind, rain, and time. Today, we're opening the archives on 7 chilling cases from the Rock. From a desperate mother who vanished into a winter storm trying to reach her baby, to a seasoned outdoorsman lured into the wilderness by a single misplaced pixel on a dashboard screen. These tragedies run deep, and in some cases, they push the Canadian justice system to the brink. 7 open wounds, 7 trails frozen solid, 7 reminders of what happens when you step off the pavement and into the unknown. This is Northern Crimes. St. John's, Newfoundland, December 14th, 1981. The island of Newfoundland has always been defined by its rugged isolation and a deep communal trust. Before the winter of 1981, well, it was a place where doors were often left unlocked, neighbors were family, and hitchhiking was simply how teenagers got around St. John's. But on a cold, damp Monday evening, that all changed. At 5 p.m., 14-year-old Dana Bradley left a friend's house on a quiet cul-de-sac. It was her mom's birthday, and Dana was eager to get home for the family dinner. She walked toward the brightly lit thoroughfare of Topsail Road to catch a bus, but growing impatient after waiting a few minutes at the stop, she stood near a local McDonald's, raised her hand, and stuck out her thumb. Witnesses across the street watched a light-colored sedan pull over to the shoulder at 5:20 p.m. The driver reached across the interior to open the passenger door from the inside, a distinct physical detail that would burn itself into the memory of onlookers. Dana climbed inside, the door clicked shut, and the taillights dissolved into the evening traffic. She was never seen alive again. 4 days later, a family walking through a wooded area off Maddox Cove Road, just south of the city, made a horrifying discovery. Dana's body had been left in the brush. She'd been assaulted and killed by a catastrophic skull fracture. But it was the layout of the crime scene that truly haunted investigators. Dana's body hadn't just been left there. It was carefully arranged in what detectives termed a burial fashion. Dressed in her school clothes, her school books were neatly tucked under her arm. The lack of any struggle or blood at the site proved she'd been murdered elsewhere and transported to the remote woods. The task force launched what would become the most expensive and exhaustive homicide investigation in Canadian history, at least up to that point. Detectives aggressively screened over 800 vehicles in the first 2 weeks alone, eventually logging thousands across the province. They also processed 250 prime suspects using polygraphs and primitive forensic hair sampling. But the harsh Atlantic weather, a relentless mix of rain, wind, and snow over those 4 days, had severely degraded the outdoor crime scene. Investigators were left with almost no physical evidence, managing to recover only 10 strands of rootless hair. The case seemed to break wide open in 1986, when a man named David Somerton penned an anonymous note that police traced back to a medical prescription pad. Under an intense 18-hour interrogation while suffering from drug and alcohol withdrawal, Somerton confessed to killing Dana with a heavy blackjack weapon. He said he'd left his car at a local dump afterward. But with zero physical evidence recovered to back it up, Somerton eventually recanted, stating he would have confessed to anything just to escape the interrogation room. The murder charges were eventually stayed, and he was sentenced to 2 years for public mischief. Decades rolled by, and Dana Bradley became a dark legend in Newfoundland. The RCMP room dedicated to her file grew from a single folder to 2 rooms of overflowing filing cabinets. Then came the modern forensic era. In 2000, investigators utilized emerging mitochondrial testing to test the rootless hairs from 1981. It was compared against 8 previous suspects, but yielded no matches. Then, a massive breakthrough finally happened in 2016, when advanced testing successfully isolated a clean, distinct DNA profile of an unknown male subject. This was from the original crime scene samples. The genetic blueprint completely cleared several highly publicized suspects, but still, it didn't yield a name. As of 2026, the 45th anniversary of her death, the trail has gone cold again. The RCMP recently announced that the suspect tied to the 2016 DNA breakthrough has actually been cleared and had no involvement in her murder. The case is an open wound for Newfoundland, a 45-year mystery that leaves a dark shadow over the island. The unknown man from Topsail Road either took his dark secret to the grave or is still hiding somewhere.
As a business leader, you know family matters to your employees, even the four-legged kind. When companies offer pet insurance, HR professionals report that 84% of employees feel better about their jobs. That's because healthier pets make for happier employees. New to Canada, One Pack Plan helps make it easy to offer pet insurance as an employee benefit. Flat group rates, seamless payroll integration, and coverage for pre-existing conditions. Look after who they love, and they'll love working for you. Let's talk. Visit onepackplan.ca today.
St. John's, Newfoundland, December 29th, 1978. It was a cold and overcast day as a trace of fresh Christmas snow settled over a busy St. John's thoroughfare. On the night of December 28th, 17-year-old Sharon Drover was working a late-night holiday shift at the local McDonald's. It was payday, and when she clocked out at 2 a.m. on the morning of December 29th, she collected her paycheck, a check she would never get the chance to cash. Sharon was a slight girl with brown hair who'd recently spent Christmas with her biological mother and father on Bell Island. She'd just returned to the city, moving into a downtown boarding house at 9 Livingstone Street with her boyfriend, a man named Victor, and several other tenants. It had been snowing that night and early morning. She faced a dark, uphill walk of more than 4 kilometers home in her knee-high black boots, pale blue jeans, and beige winter jacket. But she never made it. Sharon didn't show up for New Year's dinner with her family, and she told her sister she would. Her concerned foster mother even approached a social worker, only to be told that because Sharon was 17, she was technically of age and her whereabouts were none of her business. But because of this bureaucratic issue, Sharon Drover wasn't officially reported missing until 46 days after she vanished. By the time a missing persons file was opened, the delay hampered the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary's efforts to find fresh evidence. For over a decade, the RNC chased leads, even thoroughly searching empty wooded areas off the Foxtrap Access Road and Topsail Road based on anonymous tips. Unfortunately, nothing ever turned up. But in the 1990s, the case took a dramatic turn when a man came forward with his brother. They had a story they'd kept to themselves for years. They claimed that sometime after 2 a.m. on the night Sharon vanished, they'd picked up a young woman hitchhiking along Kenmount Road. They gave her a ride through the snow and dropped her off safely at the corner of Longs Hill and Livingstone Street, just steps from her boarding house. This testimony completely rewrote the timeline. Sharon hadn't been abducted on her walk home. She'd arrived safely in her own neighborhood. And this shifted the focus of the homicide investigation directly to the boarding house at 9 Livingstone Street. In November 1995, the RNC asked the new tenants of the home to leave and brought in a contractor to tear up the concrete floor of the basement. Investigators now had information to believe Sharon's remains were hidden beneath the house, yet the search came up empty. Today, RNC Inspector Tom Warren maintains that a specific person identified during that 1995 excavation remains the primary suspect. The RNC has noted, however, that while Sharon's family suspects her boyfriend, he was questioned and is not the suspect. However, in a case with no body, no modern CCTV footage, no cell phone data, and no DNA evidence from a 1978 crime scene, there just isn't enough evidence to press charges, and nobody has been arrested. Sharon's name sits under file number 1979-1025, taped to a big blue plastic box in a secure evidence room at RNC headquarters. It's a reminder that in the unforgiving geography of Newfoundland, the greatest obstacle to justice isn't always the weather. Sometimes it's the ticking of a clock.
That was a short one. Maybe I'll turn it off though.
Torbay, Newfoundland, November 9th, 1996. The rugged coastal town of Torbay sits just north of St. John's, perched on cliffs that look out over the Atlantic. On the weekend of November 9th, 1996, Diana Saunders was preparing her home for the return of her 3 sons, 14-year-old Adam, 11-year-old Trevor, and 4-year-old Mitchell. The boys were on a scheduled weekend visitation with their non-custodial father, Gary O'Brien. Little Mitchell had been feeling unwell that morning, and Diana had initially tried to keep him home, but Gary had fiercely insisted that all 3 brothers attend. At 8:30 p.m. that evening, the phone rang. It was Gary. His voice was cold, flat, and completely devoid of emotion. He told Diana that he was never returning the kids. When Diana demanded to speak to her sons, Gary muttered a single word.
Later.
But he left behind a final, terrifying parting gift. He casually told her that he'd rigged their family home in Torbay to explode. When police officers rushed to the residence, they discovered a horrifying setup. Gary had hauled 2 massive 400-pound propane tanks into the house and wired them into a makeshift bomb. RNC reports later stated the trap was so sensitive that if Diana or anyone else simply rung the doorbell or tried to enter, the blast would have caved in the house and damaged neighboring homes. While the bomb squad managed to defuse the trap, Gary and the 3 boys had vanished into the night. A year later, the investigation took a dark turn when a car engine assembly was discovered sitting on the ocean floor near the cliffs of Flat Rock, just 10 kilometers away. It belonged to a 1989 Ford Tempo, the exact make and model Gary drove. Some investigators feared the worst, that Gary drove his sons off the cliff and into the sea, but there were no bodies, clothing, or car chassis found. Diana firmly believed the engine was a brilliant, calculated diversion meant to get the police to stop looking, and she was right to keep fighting. In 1998, a massive lead exploded across the country in Thunder Bay, Ontario. A woman contacted investigators with a highly credible tip, claiming she'd recently babysat 3 brothers matching the O'Briens' descriptions. To prove her story, the caller provided intimate family details, including unpublished childhood nicknames for at least one of the boys. It was the breakthrough the family desperately needed, but before police could pinpoint their location, the woman went silent and never called back. Thunder Bay remains the last known whereabouts of the boys, though police have continued to receive tips from across North America as recently as 2016. Over the decades, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has periodically released age-progressed composite photos using a mix of hereditary science and art to simulate what Adam, Trevor, and Mitchell would look like as grown men. And Diana Saunders hasn't given up hope either. She theorizes that Gary may have brainwashed the boys against her or hidden them away in an off-grid religious commune. Today, the file remains an active, open, multi-jurisdictional investigation under RNC case number 96-30299, and Gary Joseph O'Brien remains an internationally sought suspect wanted by Interpol. A $50,000 reward remains on the table for any information that can solve Canada's most notorious parental abduction, a nearly 30-year ghost hunt that began with a rigged doorbell and a mother left waiting.
You kind of like it down like that, so.
Transform my home office from this to this under 30 minutes. This secret to my perfect work from home setup. 3 simple upgrades from Canadian Tire. First, my desk. Every great workspace starts with the right desk. The Canvas desk is a full-size desk that gives me a dedicated space to focus. The 2 built-in drawers keep essentials organized and clutter hidden. It's the kind of desk that makes working from home feel better. Second, my chair. A comfortable office chair is such a must-have for me. The Canvas office chair features adjustable height and a 360 swivel. It helps me move easily, stay supported, and work comfortably throughout the day. And third, my lighting. No setup feels complete without the right lighting. The Noma desk lamp is a multifunctional desk lamp that brightens my workspace while charging my phone. With adjustable brightness and light tones, I can easily adapt it to any task. Complete the space, the Hatch Restore 3 and this white wire basket. 2 simple essentials I use every day. Don't wait, visit your local Canadian Tire to update your workspace.
Squish it in So the glue will hide it. Fluff it up a little bit. Do kind of like that. Not my favorite, but she'll do. She's cute.
St. John's,
So
Newfoundland,
grumpy.
December 11th, 1982. To understand the isolation Henrietta Millick faced, you have to understand the distance between her home and the city where she vanished. Henrietta was a 25-year-old Inuk woman who'd moved south from the small coastal community of Nain, Labrador, to the streets of St. John's. She was incredibly driven, working 2 jobs as a house cleaner and an Inuit language translator while taking classes at Memorial
You do the face
University. Her dream was to become a nurse, but her immediate goal was much closer to her heart. She was working to regain custody of her infant son, Byron, who was in foster care 70 kilometers outside the city in the town of Makinsons. On the morning of December 10th, 1982, Henrietta told her landlord and best friend that she was heading out to see her baby, but she never made it to the highway that morning. Instead, she got trapped in the gravity of the St. John's nightlife. By the evening of December 10th or 11th, Henrietta was seen inside the Key Club, an after-hours bar on Water Street West known by locals as a rough, volatile spot. The bartender noticed that Henrietta was deeply upset and crying. Even more concerning were 2 or 3 unknown men, including 2 wearing beige coats, who were being aggressive towards her. Police later learned that 2 of the men grabbed Henrietta by the arm, attempting to remove her from the club. However, the bartender actually stepped away into a back room, and when she came back out, Henrietta and the men were gone. Late that night, Henrietta made one final desperate phone call to her best friend's boarding house. Apparently, she sounded a little bit drunk and upset, but the landlord, annoyed by the late hour, refused to wake her friend and hung up the phone. It was the last time anyone ever heard Henrietta's voice. When the bar closed, the bartender found Henrietta's purse abandoned on the floor. Inside was $8.15 in cash, her address book, her bank book, and the keys to her room. She disappeared into the freezing December night. For over 30 years, the RNC operated under a single grim assumption. Henrietta had been abducted from the bar and killed. In 1995, acting on a tip that she'd been knocking on doors in Shea Heights looking for her boyfriend, police excavated a home on Blackhead Road. They found nothing. In 2013, detectives tried using advanced touch DNA testing on her recovered purse, but the test also didn't lead anywhere. Then, in 2016, the entire narrative shifted. A highly credible witness finally came forward after keeping silent for 34 years. He claimed that on a bitterly cold night in December 1982, he and a friend picked up an Indigenous woman hitchhiking on the Trans-Canada Highway. She explicitly told them she was trying to get to Makinsons to visit a family member. The driver explained that they drove her as far as they could, dropping her off at a desolate intersection of the highway and Roach's Line. This new revelation prompted a massive modern search of the dense, untamed woods surrounding Roach's Line. About 45 searchers combed the brush, but the 30-year delay, it proved insurmountable. The RNC's primary theory completely flipped. They now believe it's most plausible that Henrietta, desperate to see her baby, attempted to walk the remaining dark miles through a biting Newfoundland winter storm and succumbed to the weather in the woods. Henrietta Millick's story is a tragedy that is common throughout Canada. Her case was later brought before the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, where her family testified about decades of dismissive attitudes and poor communication by the police. Henrietta's mother passed away in 2018, having spent 36 years looking out her window in Labrador, waiting for a daughter who was dropped off on a dark highway and lost to the snow.
Connect with Canadian licensed doctors and NPs whenever or wherever you need them.
Yeah, okay. Don't do that again. We've learned.
Daughter who was dropped off on a dark highway and lost to the snow.
The colors to work with are yellow, blue, and green.
Bottom Brook area, Western Newfoundland, October 9th, 2011. The backcountry of Western Newfoundland is beautiful, but it's also a deceptive maze of long-abandoned logging trails, thick brush, and rushing rivers. It's an unforgiving landscape that doesn't really care about your experience level. In October 2011, 65-year-old William Oberkaiser, known to everyone back home in Indiana as Obi, embarked on an 1,800-mile solo drive to the island. Obi was a veteran of the National Guard, a retired power company employee, and a legendary figure in his hunting community. In 2008, he'd won a prestigious big game award for a black bear hunt on the Buckens Plateau. This trip was roughly his 7th time visiting Newfoundland, and it was meant to be his final grand hunting sojourn to the island. He knew the terrain, he had the gear, and he knew how to survive. Yet, the moment he drove his gray Ford F-150 off the ferry at Port aux Basques, something went terribly wrong. To reach his intended hunting camp in the Buckens area, Obi should have taken the well-traveled Burgeo road. Instead, for reasons that his family still can't understand, he made a sharp, illogical deviation. He turned his truck onto Bottom Brook Road. The first 3 miles were gravel, but the path quickly deteriorated into an overgrown trail that required crossing 2 roaring rivers and a stream. It was a route completely unfit for a standard vehicle, yet Obi kept driving, pushing his truck deeper and deeper into the wilderness. Finally, 6 miles down the impassable trail and roughly 9 miles from the main highway, the F-150 became violently high-centered on a tree stump. When the abandoned truck was spotted the next day, searchers found a deeply perplexing scene. The vehicle was locked. Inside sat his hunting firearms, his personal papers, and crucially, his hearing aids. Obi had stepped out into the forest completely unarmed, unable to hear, and entirely alone. The RCMP launched a rescue operation deploying helicopters, police dog units, and amphibious ATVs. But the teams faced a logistical nightmare. The trail was so overgrown that the RCMP had to use chainsaws just to clear a path for a specialized tow truck to retrieve Obi's truck. Observers have proposed a potential reason for his bizarre route, a GPS malfunction. In tragic incidents like this, a digital navigation system treats a forgotten, unmaintained footpath as a viable road. Obi may have blindly trusted his screen until it was too late. This would have left him stranded miles into the interior as the autumn temperatures plummeted to a freezing 25 degrees. On October 13th, local hunters reported hearing a faint, distant voice echoing through the trees from the evening prior. Searchers rushed to the area, but the dense canopy yielded no clues, and the window for survival quickly slammed shut. 6 days after he vanished, the operation transitioned from a rescue to a recovery. Obi's family held a memorial service back in Indiana, and his official date of death was registered as October 9th, 2011. Despite multiple sweeps of the high ground surrounding the truck, no trace of William Oberkaiser has ever been found. His case stands as a disturbing cautionary tale for the digital age, a reminder that in the deep woods of Newfoundland, a single misplaced pixel on a dashboard screen can lure even the most seasoned outdoorsman to a...
The hunter should have known that. Okay, this one is not working either. I need a different color for you.
Gander, Newfoundland,
Damn,
August
it's gonna be
4th,
purple.
2002.
All right, let's start. We need a lot of colors
Gander
for
Lake
this.
is a massive, extremely deep body of water that slices through the rocky terrain of central Newfoundland. It's usually a scenic gathering place for families, especially on a civic holiday like Gander Day. On the morning of August 4th, 2002, 34-year-old Nelson Hart drove his 3-year-old twin daughters, Karen and Krista, down to a quiet spot known as Little Harbor. His wife, Jennifer Hicks, stayed behind to prepare for the day's festivities. But by midday, the holiday atmosphere was shattered. Both little girls were dead, having drowned in the frigid waters of the lake. From the very beginning, the timeline of that morning was warped by Nelson Hart's wildly shifting stories. Initially, he told police a frantic, highly questionable tale. Krista had accidentally fallen off the dock, and because he couldn't swim, he panicked. Instead of jumping in or calling for help from nearby residents, he drove 10 kilometers back to Gander to fetch Jennifer, leaving his other 3-year-old daughter, Karen, completely unattended by the deep water. 2 months later, Hart suddenly changed his story. He admitted the first version was a lie, claiming instead that he'd suffered an epileptic seizure the moment he took the girls out of the car. He claimed he blacked out, and when he woke up, his daughters were already floating in the lake. He said that he only lied because he was afraid the province would revoke his driver's license due to his medical condition. With no physical evidence or eyewitnesses to disprove the blackout theory, investigators had to get creative. Contrary to what some believed, the investigation never stopped. Police continued to quietly pursue leads in the background.
Easy to style, easy to wear. Shop trendy prescription glasses for men and women at Vermoon. Back office tasks taking too much time. All the shift swaps, scheduling mishaps, and messy communication can keep you tied to your desk instead of building a successful business. Don't worry, at When I Work, we've got your back. Office. Let the easy-to-use software help you build the schedule in minutes.
In the background. 3 years later, the RCMP decided to break the stalemate. Believing Hart had killed his daughters, they launched an exhaustive, highly covert, 4-month undercover sting operation known as Mr. Big. Undercover operatives approached Hart, who was living under severe socioeconomic strain and relying on social assistance. They befriended him, offering him cash for small, trivial tasks. Slowly, they convinced him he was being recruited into a high-level, lucrative, coast-to-coast criminal syndicate. They flew him across Canada, put him in luxury hotels, and showered him with expensive gifts to build a deep sense of trust and financial dependency. The trap snapped shut when Hart first confessed to an undercover Mountie who'd gained his trust by confiding about terrible things from his own past. The Mounties then pressed him further, setting up a meeting with their fake crime boss, who wanted to know the truth to advance Hart's criminal career. During the meeting, Hart confessed on hidden camera, admitting he'd killed his twin daughters. In 2007, a jury viewed the videotaped confession, found Hart guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, and sentenced him to life in prison, but the legal saga was far from over. Hart's defense team appealed the conviction to the Provincial Supreme Court of Appeal, arguing that the videotaped confession was inadmissible due to the coercive nature and extreme financial inducements of the operation. They won, prompting the Crown to appeal the case all the way to the highest court in the land. In a landmark 2014 decision that forever changed the Canadian justice system, the Supreme Court of Canada agreed with the lower court and tossed the confession. The judges established strict new parameters for Mr. Big operations, warning that these tactics pose dangerous risks regarding the reliability of the confession, unfair prejudice, and potential police misconduct. Without the tape, the prosecution's case collapsed. The Crown withdrew the murder charges, and after 9 volatile years in custody, marked by prison brawls and an infamous incident where he was charged with assaulting a guard with a paper plate, Nelson Hart walked out of prison a free man. To this day, the drownings at Gander Lake are officially classified as an unsolved tragedy. Whether Nelson Hart was an innocent father caught in an epileptic nightmare or a calculating killer who beat a high-stakes psychological trap, the system ran out of answers. The dark waters of Gander Lake have kept their secrets, leaving 2 children without justice and a family permanently broken by the aftermath.
Oh, fuzzies.
St. John's, Newfoundland, November 12th, 1984. Martin's Lounge on Water Street was a lively, warm refuge from the damp autumn chill creeping off the Atlantic. On the evening of November 12th, 1984, 19-year-old Pamela Ann Asprey was inside laughing and socializing with friends. Originally from Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador, Pamela was a blonde, blue-eyed teenager known to her family as fearless, sassy, and fiercely independent. Around 9 p.m., Pamela checked her watch and pulled herself away from the table. She told her friend she needed to step out to Duckworth Street to meet a man, but promised she'd be back in 20 minutes. To prove she was coming right back, she laid her most important personal belongings on the table as collateral: her wallet, her bank book, her debit card, and her day planner and calendar. She walked out the door of the lounge, leaving her entire life sitting in the bar, and she never came back to collect it. Detectives managed to piece together her final known moments. After leaving the lounge, Pamela walked toward the historic War Memorial on Duckworth Street. Onlookers watched a dark blue vehicle pull up on the curb. Inside was an unidentified male with a large build wearing a baseball cap. Pamela stepped into the passenger side, the door shut, and the blue vehicle disappeared into the night. 2 days later, her roommate reported her missing, but the initial police response was slow to develop. Public notice of her disappearance didn't even hit the newspapers for weeks, buried deep in the back pages among holiday shopping advertisements. Because Pamela was a frequent hitchhiker and occasionally worked in the local sex trade, authorities considered the possibility that she'd left on her own free will. But Pamela's family knew better. She hadn't touched a single cent in her bank account, and she'd left her wallet behind. But more telling was her sudden, absolute silence. Pamela was a traveler who routinely hitchhiked between Newfoundland, the Maritimes, and Winnipeg, but after November 12th, her footprint across Canada completely vanished. No record of employment, no driver's licenses, and no social assistance applications were ever filed in her name again. Over the decades, investigators chased a few fleeting leads. Pamela's aunt and sister recalled that right before she vanished, she mentioned being in a relationship with a Portuguese sailor. She'd even excitedly claimed the mystery man was arriving in St. John's in December and that they were planning to return to Portugal together. But this arrival never happened, and the search yielded no evidence or suspects.
As a business leader, you know family matters to your employees, even the four-legged kind. When companies offer pet insurance, HR professionals report that 84% of employees feel better about their job. That's because healthier pets make for
suspects. Instead, the investigation continually circled back to the shadow behind the wheel of that dark blue vehicle. RNC Inspector Tom Warren has noted that modern cold case efforts remain focused on identifying the owner or operator of that vehicle on the night in question. Did the man in the baseball cap murder Pamela that night, or did he drop her off somewhere else? Pamela's disappearance marked the fourth time in just 6 years that a young woman had vanished or been murdered under eerie, overlapping circumstances in downtown St. John's. While the rumors of a serial killer stalking the island's capital have persisted for generations, the RNC maintains there's no evidence linking the cases. More than 3 decades later, Pamela's family refuses to let her be categorized as just another transient statistic. The blue vehicle is the case's central riddle, a vehicle that vanished in 1984, carrying a 19-year-old who left her wallet on the bar and never came back. The files from the Rock show that in Newfoundland, the passage of time can be as formidable as the terrain itself. Decades have passed since Dana Bradley stepped into that sedan, since Sharon Drover's trail went cold, and since Pamela Asprey left her wallet on a bar top. Investigators are left with fragmented timelines, unidentified DNA profiles, and empty basements. And still, the landscape keeps its secrets. But as long as these files remain open, the search for answers continues, because on an island this small, someone always knows the truth.
McRae was active at that time. And he doesn't even remember all the dead bodies.
You're watching Northern Crimes.
October 4th, 1996, Mount Rainier National Park, Washington. You're finishing your last shift at the historic Paradise Inn. The summer crowds are long gone. Winter is setting in like a heavy blanket. At 43 years old, you're starting over, a former Peace Corps volunteer and recent divorcee who came to this remote corner of Washington seeking something clean, something new beneath the iconic presence of Mount Rainier. Tomorrow, you'll move down the mountain to work as a housekeeper at the National Park Inn in Longmire. A new job, a new beginning, away from whatever shadows you've been running from. You share a quiet dinner with coworkers and then return to your room for the night. Your slippers sit nice and tidy beside the bed. Your belongings organized with the meticulous care that everyone has always noticed about you. Everything is in its place. But as you prepare for sleep in the growing darkness, you don't know that someone is watching you. Someone knows your routines, your fears, your desperate need to stay hidden. By Sunday morning, your bed will remain unslept in, and you'll have vanished into the mountain wilderness that was supposed to be your sanctuary. Because in Mount Rainier National Park, the terrain is built for disappearances, but eventually the snow melts and the past resurfaces. This is Northern Crimes.
Join the new Michael's Rewards program for free and get 3% back on your purchase. Level up to gold and earn 6% back. And you can go platinum and earn 9% back. The new Michael's Rewards program. Create more, earn more.
That's right. Need something to go around, though. Yellow is what I have to work with. I don't like it. Well, what about yellow and pink? That's not bad. I don't know if I have enough of this, though. Maybe a little green for the eye. I don't know why I came over here. Hello. I haven't used you yet. That is awesome.
Mount Rainier National Park, May 1979. Mount Rainier is a landscape of absolute contrast. Alpine meadows of wildflowers that give way to the grinding blue ice of powerful glaciers. It's a place that draws the adventurous, but in 1979, it became the site of a disappearance that remains one of the most unnerving cold cases in the Pacific Northwest. Elaine Marie Robertson was a 24-year-old probation officer from California with a master's degree and a love for the open road. Following a personal breakup, she packed her Volkswagen camper van and headed north to Washington for a solo Memorial Day weekend. She was experienced, sensible, and scheduled to be back at her desk in San Luis Obispo on May 31st, but she never made it. The mystery of Elaine's disappearance is defined by a 40-mile gap that investigators still can't seem to bridge. On May 26th, her VW van was found abandoned on the mountain highway in Elk Plain, Washington. The battery was dead. The van sat silent on the shoulder of the road, but Elaine wasn't there. So the next evening, 40 miles to the southeast, Elaine emerged from the tree line at the Sunshine Point campground, right on the edge of Mount Rainier National Park. She wasn't alone. She was accompanied by her 2 dogs. But the woman who walked into the camp wasn't the composed professional her friends knew. Witnesses described her as quote-unquote incoherent, soaking wet and shivering from the mountain cold. Two kind-hearted campers gave her some food, a change of clothes, and loaned her a tent for the night. But when those campers woke up the next morning, while the tent was empty, Elaine and her dogs were gone. They vanished into the morning mist of the Nisqually River Valley. She left behind her personal books, her oil painting supplies, and the very tent that kept her warm. She and her animals had disappeared into the wilderness. The initial search party, it was pretty serious for the time. Nearly 100 volunteers, tracking dogs, and helicopters scoured the rugged terrain all around the river. Park officials eventually called off that search on June 4th, suggesting she might have simply hitched a ride out of the park. But 45 years have passed, and not a single trace of Elaine or her dogs has ever been found. No clothing, no remains, and no sightings. Modern investigators, including Detective Sergeant Linnell Anderson of the Pierce County Sheriff's Department, they look at the case through a much darker lens. They point to the 1970s as the golden age of serial killers in Washington. This was a time when predators stalked the highway corridors leading into the wilderness. And the theory is that Elaine may have encountered a monster while hitchhiking between her broken down van and the mountain. Or perhaps the person who helped her at the campground wasn't the only one watching her. So as the years have passed, nature itself has conspired to keep the secret. In November 2006, a catastrophic flood saw the Nisqually River reclaim the Sunshine Point campground. It's gone now. 18 inches of rain washed the entire site away, basically destroying the last physical crime scene where Elaine was seen alive. Today, the case of Elaine Marie Robertson is a race against time. The witnesses from 1979 are aging, and the forest has grown over the trails she once walked. Investigators are still holding out for that one minor detail. Someone who saw a woman and two dogs on the road 40 years ago that might finally provide a map to where Elaine's journey truly ended.
My mom's friends were killed in Washington. They were shot execution
Mount Rainier
style
National
inside the
Park,
road.
October 1996. When the summer season winds down at Mount Rainier, the crowds thin out, and a heavy, damp silence settles over the old-growth forests of the national park. For 43-year-old Sheila Ann Kearns, this transition was supposed to be a fresh start. A former Peace Corps volunteer and a recent divorcee, Sheila had arrived at the park in August to work the front desk at the historic Paradise Inn. She was basically starting over, looking for a life that was clean and fresh beneath the iconic presence of the mountain. As the Paradise Inn prepared to close its doors for the winter on October 1st, Sheila stayed on, hired to move down the mountain to the National Park Inn at Longmire to work as a housekeeper. She was a woman remembered for her clear eyes, her long dark hair, and an incredibly spiritual nature. But her coworkers also noticed something else. Sheila was always on edge, like anxious. She was meticulous, careful to a fault, and moved with the constant nagging fear that something or someone from her past was going to catch up to her. On Friday evening, October 4th, 1996, Sheila shared a final meal with her friends and coworkers. It was a typical, quiet evening. She was scheduled to report for her new shift at Longmire on Sunday, but when Sunday morning came, she never showed up. When rangers eventually checked her room, they found a scene that felt frozen in time. Her bed was unslept in. Her slippers were tucked beside the mattress. Her car was still in its spot, and all of her personal belongings, her wallet, her ID, the very things she would need to start a new life, were undisturbed. There was no note, no sign of a struggle, and no Sheila. A 3-day search followed, with rangers and tracking dogs scouring the steep, timbered slopes around Longmire. But in October, the mountain is unpredictable. The clouds dropped low, and the first winter snows began to bury the trails. The search was called off, and for 7 months, Sheila Kearns was simply a name on a missing person poster. Sheila Kearns was simply a name on a missing person poster. The mystery took a grim turn on May 10th, 1997. A volunteer setting up a navigation course near the old Longmire campground spotted something in the brush. It was Sheila's remains, scattered over about a 300-yard area, less than a mile from where she was supposed to be working. The discovery forced the National Park Service and the FBI to reconsider everything. Initially, some wondered if she'd been a victim of a cougar attack, the kind of sudden violent encounter that can happen in the Rainier backcountry, but the forensic evidence didn't fit. Sheila was incredibly careful. She wasn't the type to wander off trail in the dark, especially given her palpable fear of being followed. By March 1998, federal authorities made it official. Sheila's death was being investigated as a homicide. They believed she'd been abducted, plucked from the safety of the park's employee housing by someone who knew her movements. The FBI sent a number of items of evidence to their lab in D.C., and while they interviewed numerous suspects, every lead eventually withered. Today, the case of Sheila Kearns remains one of the most haunting shadows over Mount Rainier. For the people who worked with her, the area around Longmire hasn't felt the same since 1996. They speak of a sinister aura that lingers near the old campground, a feeling that the mountain is holding on to some dark secret. Sheila's mother, Olive, passed away without ever knowing who took her daughter. The FBI still offers a $20,000 reward for the missing piece of the puzzle. That one person from Sheila's past on her final days who knows exactly what happened after she stepped out of her room that Friday night. Until then, Sheila remains the housekeeper of Longmire, a woman who came to the mountain to escape her past, only to find that some shadows are long enough to reach even the highest peaks. Mount Rainier National Park, January 1st, 2012. New Year's Day at Mount Rainier is typically a scene of quiet. Hundreds of families head to the Paradise area to go sledding, snowshoeing, or to take in the views of the 14,000-foot peak that dominates the Pacific Northwest skyline. But as the sun rose on the first morning of 2012, a darkness was already speeding toward the park from the lowlands of Seattle. At 10:20 a.m., a blue vehicle blew past a mandatory tire chain checkpoint near Longmire. It was a routine violation, but the man behind the wheel was anything but routine. 24-year-old Benjamin Colton Barnes was an Iraq War veteran who, just 8 hours earlier, had allegedly opened fire at a New Year's Eve party in Skyway, wounding 4 people. He was armed, volatile, and heading straight for the crowded visitor centers at the top of the mountain. Ranger Margaret Anderson, a 34-year-old mother of 2, was the first to respond. She didn't know anything about the shooting in Skyway. She only knew that a vehicle was defying park regulations and potentially endangering other drivers. Margaret performed a textbook maneuver, positioning her patrol SUV sideways across both lanes at a spot known as Barn Flats to block the suspect's path. As Barnes approached the roadblock, he did not slow down. He performed a sharp U-turn, jumped out of his car, and immediately opened fire with a high-powered semi-automatic assault rifle. Margaret was struck while behind the wheel. A second ranger, Dan Kamisha, arrived seconds later and was met with a hail of battlefield-grade gunfire. Bullets punched through his windshield in a 4-corner pattern around his head, narrowly missing him.
Jesus.
Outgunned and under fire, Kamisha was forced to retreat in reverse just to survive. Because Barnes had taken a tactical position behind high snowbanks and continued to fire at anything that moved, rescue teams couldn't reach Margaret for 90 minutes. When a Pierce County SWAT team finally used a ballistic shield to reach her vehicle, it was too late. Margaret Anderson, who'd spent her career protecting the park's visitors, had become the first ranger in Mount Rainier's history to be killed in the line of duty. The shooting triggered an immediate lockdown. At the Jackson Visitor Center, 125 tourists and 17 staff members were herded down into the basement. Unarmed interpretive rangers turned the building into a fortress. searching visitors for weapons and bracing for a mass casualty event. Outside, a massive 24-hour manhunt began. Over 200 officers from the FBI, State Patrol, and local SWAT teams converged on the park. They used heat-sensing technology in armored vehicles to track a man they knew was wearing heavy body armor and carrying an arsenal that included an AR-15 and an AK-47. Despite his military training, Barnes was unprepared for the mountain's ultimate defense. He fled into the deep snow, 4 to 5 feet deep in some places, wearing only a t-shirt, jeans, and one tennis shoe. As temperatures plummeted below freezing, the hunter became the hunted. SWAT teams followed his post hole tracks through the drifts until the trail went cold. Then, on the morning of January 2nd, a fixed-wing aircraft spotted a figure lying face down in the Paradise River. Barnes hadn't died in a final blaze of glory. He'd succumbed to the mountain itself, dead from hypothermia in the icy water.
Yeah. Too good for him. It's so free, but it's a fluffy. It's fluffy.
Itself, dead from hypothermia in the icy water.
Hello.
The legacy of the Barn Flats ambush is one of both tragedy and profound heroism. Margaret Anderson was supposed to be in her final year at Rainier. She and her husband, Eric, also a ranger, were planning to move closer to family and start a new chapter. Instead, she became the shield that protected the mountain. Investigators later found a massive stash of magazines and survivalist gear in Barnes' car. Pierce County detectives were blunt in their assessment. If Margaret hadn't stopped him at Barn Flats, Barnes would have reached the Paradise parking lot where hundreds of unsuspecting families were playing in the snow. Ranger Anderson gave her life to ensure that a New Year's Day tragedy didn't become a massacre. Today, her badge remains a symbol of the thin green line that stands between the beauty of our national parks and the urban violence that occasionally and tragically spills into the wilderness. Mount Rainier National Park, November 2020. The mountain is a place of life and death, but rarely does it offer a second chance as dramatic as the one given to Michael Lipinski. In November 2020, the 45-year-old Woodinville man was snowshoeing near Paradise when a sudden whiteout swallowed the trail. For hours, he wandered through blinding snow and freezing temperatures before losing consciousness. When a Navy helicopter crew finally spotted him the following afternoon, Lipinski was a literal block of ice. His body temperature had plummeted to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. By the time he reached the ER at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, his heart had stopped. For 45 minutes, Michael Lipinski was clinically dead. His survival became an international headline, a medical miracle fueled by a cutting-edge technology known as ECMO. The machine essentially acted as his heart and lungs, pulling his blood out, oxygenating it, and pumping it back in, while doctors worked to restart his own frozen heart. His medical team noted that the extreme hypothermia from the mountain had actually protected his brain, slowing his metabolism enough to prevent permanent damage during those 45 minutes of silence. 2 days after his heart stopped, Lipinski opened his eyes. By day 8, he walked out of the hospital. In emotional media interviews, he spoke of a profound spiritual shift.
I owe society a lot,
he told reporters, promising to spend his bonus time on Earth dedicated to service and charity. For a brief moment, he was the ultimate symbol of human resilience and the triumph of science over the elements. But the quote-unquote bonus time Michael Lipinski was granted took a dark and violent turn. 4 years after the mountain tried to claim him, Lipinski's name reappeared in the headlines, not as a survivor, but as a defendant. In November 2024, Lipinski was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The high-profile Miracle Man was accused of a cold-blooded execution in a Safeway parking lot in Bothell, Washington. Prosecutors allege that Lipinski arranged a meeting to buy $1,900 worth of methamphetamine and fentanyl. According to court documents, the victim entered Lipinski's SUV where he was shot to death. Lipinski then allegedly dumped the man's body in the middle of the parking lot and fled. The investigation took a final damning turn when Lipinski's roommate told police that Lipinski had confessed to the killing, reportedly stating,
I shot him. I did it.
Prosecutors, arguing that Lipinski poses a significant danger to the community, pointed out the chilling irony. A man whose life was saved by a multi-million-dollar medical effort was willing to end another person's life over less than $2,000. Recently, Michael Lipinski has sat in the Snohomish County Jail on a $1 million bond. The soft-spoken hiker who once gave a thumbs up from a hospital bed now faces decades in prison. His story has become a stark dichotomy, a journey that began with a heroic rescue in the sub-freezing reaches of Mount Rainier and ended in the violent reality of a
all that effort to
suburban
save
drug
him, and he just...
Mount Rainier gave Michael
He's a
Lipinski
damn
his
monster.
life, but it couldn't change who he was. Cold, killer. 4 stories, 1 mountain, and 4 reminders that Mount Rainier is more than just a landmark. It's a witness. From the vanishing of Elaine Robertson to the battlefield ambush of Margaret Anderson, the high peaks of the Cascades hold secrets that are sometimes recovered and sometimes buried forever under the ice.
Artemis!
You're watching Northern Crimes.
June 24th, 1997.
Artemis!
National Forest, Wyoming. You're 24 years old, a cross-country runner and Olympic hopeful. The Wyoming mountains are your backyard. The afternoon sun filters through the pines of the Wind River Range as you park your car along the loop road.
Sure, why not?
You're scouting a 10K
Up the same
cross-country
street.
race through
Okay.
one of Wyoming's most breathtaking landscapes. Your to-do list sits on the passenger's seat. Every single item crossed off, except one. Just a run. Something you've done thousands of times before, in conditions far more demanding than this perfect July afternoon. The trail stretches ahead through the cathedral pines, the thin mountain air filling your lungs as your feet find their rhythm on the familiar terrain. Everything feels right. Everything feels safe. Somewhere along that remote mountain road, something interrupts your run. Something that happens fast and clean, leaving behind no footprints, no clothing fibers, no signs of a struggle. Just your car parked exactly where you left it, your to-do list with that final unchecked item. And somewhere in the open Wyoming landscape, a predator who is camping just miles away and has never spoken a single word about what he saw that afternoon. Because in the Wind River Range, where granite peaks touch the sky and trails disappear into wilderness, even the strongest among us can simply vanish. This is Northern Crimes.
No, get back on. There we go.
Breckenridge, Colorado, January 6th, 1982. The Rocky Mountains in midwinter are a beautiful but unforgiving landscape. In 1982, Breckenridge was a quiet ski town where hitchhiking was as common as catching a bus. But on the night of January 6th, a brutal cold front wasn't the only thing moving through the passes. Within a matter of hours, two young women, 21-year-old cocktail waitress Annette Schnee and 29-year-old Bobby Joe Oberholzer, vanished into the high-altitude darkness. Bobby Joe's body was found the next morning on the frozen summit of Hoosier Pass. She'd been shot in the chest. It took 6 more months for the mountain to give up Annette Schnee. Her body was discovered 23 miles away in Sacramento Creek. She'd been shot in the back. For decades, these two murders were the ghost stories of Summit County, linked by a single, bizarre piece of evidence, a pair of bright orange booty socks. The orange sock connection was the forensic bridge that kept the cases alive. One sock was found near Bobby Joe's body. The other was still being worn by Annette. DNA testing years later confirmed a chilling reality. Bobby Joe's blood was on the outside of the sock, and Annette's skin cells were on the inside. They were killed by the same man, in the same window of time, using the same weapon. For nearly 40 years, the investigation languished. Suspects came and went, including Bobby Joe's husband, Jeff, who lived under a cloud of suspicion for decades simply because he was the only person who knew both women. But the truth was buried in a file that no one thought to connect to the murders, a rescue report from the very night the women disappeared.
Out of the way of the paint water.
On January 6th, 1982, as a blizzard hammered Winella Pass, an airline passenger looking out a cabin window spotted something impossible in the darkness below. Headlights flashing SOS in Morse code. A local fire chief, Dave Montoya, fought through the snow to reach the coordinates. There, he found a man named Alan Lee Phillips stranded in his truck. Phillips was intoxicated and had a massive bloody gash on his face. He claimed he'd hit his head on the steering wheel. Montoya rescued him, unaware he'd just saved a monster. In 2021, the shadow finally lifted. Using forensic genetic genealogy, investigators traced DNA from a bloody glove found at Bobby Joe's crime scene directly to Alan Phillips. They surveilled him for weeks, eventually snatching a discarded Sonic fast food napkin from a trash can. The match was 1 in 17 quadrillion. The gash on Phillips's face that night hadn't been from his truck. It was the mark left by Bobby Joe Oberholzer as she fought for her life in the snow. In September 2022, Alan Lee Phillips was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The man who'd been rescued from the mountains by the mercy of others was finally condemned by the mountains he'd used as a killing ground. Phillips took his own prison just months after his sentencing.
Of course.
But for the families in Breckenridge, the nightmare was over. Bobby Joe and Annette were finally at rest, their killer caught by a combination of high-tech genealogy and the very SOS signal he'd used to save himself. It stands as a reminder that in the Rockies, the snow eventually melts, and what's hidden in the dark always finds its way back into the light. Steamboat Springs, Colorado, October 1993. Steamboat Springs is a place defined by its champagne powder snow and its rugged western charm. Gerald Boggs was the heart of that community, a well-liked hardware store owner who valued honesty, routine, and hard work. But in 1991, Gerald met Jill Coit. To the local bachelor, she seemed like a dream, charming, beautiful, deeply attentive. But he had no way of knowing. He was husband number 8 in a sequence of marriages that stretched across 3 decades. Jill Coit was a master of the long con. Over 30 years, she'd utilized at least 16 different aliases and married 9 different men, often without bothering to divorce the previous one. She'd faked pregnancies, liquidated bank accounts, and orchestrated insurance scams. She was so persuasive that an elderly man in California had informally adopted her just so she could inherit his estate. But beneath the southern charm was a lethal history. Coit remained the primary suspect in the 1972 shooting death of her third husband, William Clark Coit Jr. Gerald Boggs eventually discovered the truth. His brother Doug hired a private investigator who revealed that Jill's entire life was a fabrication, including the fact that she was still legally married to another man while she was standing at the altar with Gerald. The marriage was annulled after just 7 months, leading to a bitter, high-stakes lawsuit over a bed and breakfast business they shared. But the story didn't end there. On October 22, 1993, just before the trial was set to begin, Gerald Boggs was found murdered in his home. It was a brutal, personal attack. He'd been beaten with a shovel, shocked with a stun gun, and shot 3 times in the chest. Jill and her boyfriend, Michael Backus, claimed they were nowhere near Steamboat Springs that morning. They had an alibi for the night, and they figured the remote location and the lack of witnesses would protect them. They were wrong. The case was broken wide open by an unlikely hero, a plate of hash browns. Gerald Boggs was a man of habit. Every morning he ate the exact same breakfast at a local diner called The Shack: eggs, toast, and hash browns. Using pioneering forensic botany, experts from the University of Colorado analyzed Gerald's stomach contents. They found undigested potatoes, proving he'd been killed within 2 hours of his final meal. This narrowed the window of death to a specific morning time frame, the exact window for which Jill and Michael had no alibi. The physical evidence quickly piled up. A stun gun found in Jill's car produced marks on a test subject that matched the wounds on Gerald's body perfectly. But the final betrayal came from within. Jill's own son, Seth, went to the police. He revealed that his mother had called him shortly after the murder and whispered a chilling confirmation.
It's over, baby. And it was messy.
Chilling confirmation.
It's over, baby. And it was me.
In 1995, Jill Coit was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy. The woman who'd spent her life weaving a web of lies finally ran out of exits. Today, the quote-unquote Black Widow resides in the Denver Women's Correctional Facility, serving life without the possibility of parole. Her legacy remains a dark chapter in the history of the Rockies, a reminder that even in a town as friendly as Steamboat Springs, a smiling face can hide a serial predator. Idaho Falls, Idaho, September 14th, 2001. In mid-September of 2001, the world was held in a collective, breathless shock. 3 days after the 9/11 terror attacks, the skies over America were eerily quiet, and every television screen was tuned to the devastation in New York. In Idaho Falls, 20-year-old Amber Chanel Hoops was living through that same national trauma. She was a shy, soft-spoken church singer and pianist who lived with her grandparents on their sprawling property, which housed the family's auto body repair shop.
Oh, that's ominous.
On the night of September 14th, Amber's grandparents went to bed at 10:30 p.m., leaving Amber in her room watching the news. Around 1:10 a.m., her grandmother, Kathleen, woke up and noticed Amber's light was still on. When she went to check on her, the room was empty. The television was still flickering, but Amber was gone. Outside the door to the family's auto body shop stood wide open. One of the shop's red and white pickup trucks was missing from the gravel lot. The response was immediate, but hampered by the national crisis. Because of the federal flight ban, search and rescue aircraft couldn't be deployed to survey the rugged Idaho landscape. Media coverage was saturated with 9/11 updates, making it nearly impossible for the family to get Amber's face on the news. Just over an hour after the disappearance, police found the missing shop truck abandoned only about a half-mile away. The hood was still warm to the touch, and the interior had been meticulously wiped clean of fingerprints. The odometer told a story the kidnapper hadn't considered. The truck had been driven several miles more than the distance to the dump site. Forensic botanists found specific vegetation caught in the undercarriage, plants found only in the remote high C and bone areas of the county. The perpetrator had driven Amber into the wilderness, then returned the truck to the city to confuse the trail. The investigation focused on a former employee named Keith Glenn Mark Hescock. He'd worked for Amber's grandparents for years, but left after a bitter dispute, reportedly vowing to quote-unquote ruin the family. At the time, Hescock's family provided him with a rock-solid alibi, but the mask slipped in 2002. In June of that year, Hescock kidnapped a 14-year-old girl from her home in the Milo area, chaining her to a bed in his house. When the girl bravely escaped while he was at work, Hescock led police on a 40-mile high-speed chase into the Big Hole Mountains. After shooting a police dog and wounding a deputy, Hescock took his life. Following his death, his family dropped their protection. They admitted they had lied. Hescock hadn't been home the night Amber disappeared. Keith Hescock is now suspected in several regional cold cases, including the 1993 disappearance of young Stephanie Crane. Detectives believe he was a budding serial predator who used his intimate knowledge of the Bergener property, knowing exactly which gates were left unlocked, to sneak into Amber's life and end it.
In that case, like,
Amber's
arrest the
body has
whole
never been
family.
found,
The whole
despite
family.
periodic searches of the bone area with cadaver dogs. In 2005, through the tireless advocacy of her aunt, September 14 was officially named Idaho Missing Persons Day. It's a day dedicated to the families who live in the agonizing silence of the unknown. For the Hoops family, the Mountain State's big sky remains a little emptier without Amber's voice, a reminder that while a predator can take his own life, he often leaves his victims in the vast, unforgiving terrain of the high desert. Missoula, Montana, March 13th, 1966. In the mid-1960s, Susan Elizabeth Pearson was a woman of intellect and high standing. At 30 years old, she was a doctoral candidate and a business instructor at the University of Montana. She was an heiress to a powerful Oregon political family, but in Missoula, she was simply known as a dedicated, if somewhat intense, academic. She was just days away from submitting her final thesis when the narrative of her life abruptly stopped. On the morning of March 13th, Susan failed to show up at the university to administer a final examination. This was entirely out of character for a woman whose life revolved around her professional responsibilities. When friends and police went to her apartment on Strand Avenue to check on her, they found a scene that felt like a film paused in the middle of a frame. Inside the residence, a tea kettle sat on the stove, filled with water, waiting for a cup of tea that was never made. Her brother, David, noted that the porch light, which Susan notoriously kept on every single night, was switched off. Beyond these two small anomalies, the apartment was undisturbed. There was no sign of a struggle, and nothing appeared to be missing. In fact, Susan had left behind two uncashed paychecks totaling $1,200, which was a small fortune in 1966. 4 days later, her car was found abandoned in downtown Missoula. It was unlocked with her purse, her car keys, and her identification documents still inside. The only thing missing was the cash that should have been in her wallet. It's
school season is officially here and I'm getting everything ready for the new semester. If you're doing the same, you can shop your list for less at Canadian Tire. This is everything I need to survive this fall semester. Every day starts the same way with a coffee from my compact Keurig. It's the perfect size for any small dorm or apartment. Too much space. Once my bag is packed,
that should have been in her wallet. The investigation by the Missoula Police Department branched into three conflicting directions. The first was the theory of a walkaway. A close friend, Nancy King, told detectives that Susan had recently expressed a desire to, quote, just take off and not tell anyone, end quote. Susan had been struggling with a recent divorce and the crushing pressure of her doctorate. But if she had left voluntarily, why leave behind her money, her car, and the thesis she'd spent years crafting? The second theory was friends described Susan as being in a manic and agitated state in the days leading up to her disappearance. Some feared that her sudden, upbeat change in mood was a sign that she'd made a final, tragic decision. However, despite extensive searches of the surrounding area, no body or note was ever recovered. Then, there was the darker possibility of foul play. Susan had mentioned to friends that a few students in her class had threatened to, quote, wreck her car after receiving failing grades. Detectives turned their eyes toward the Blue Mountain region south of town, a rugged area where they suspected a body might be hidden. In 1970, their hopes were briefly raised when students found skeletal remains in the woods, but pathologists later determined the bones belonged to a bear. Susan Pearson's disappearance remains one of Montana's oldest cold cases. Some modern investigators have noted a haunting pattern at the University of Montana, pointing to other students like Linda Lee Lovell and Dorothy Freeman, who vanished in the years following Susan's disappearance. Today, the apartment on Strand Avenue has new tenants, and the tea kettle has long since been cleared away. But the mystery of Susan Pearson lingers like the mountain fog. Did she step out into the Missoula night to escape the pressure of her prominent name? Or did she cross paths with someone who ensured her thesis would never see the light of day?
What's her
6 decades later, the high-altitude silence of the big sky remains the only answer.
What was the thesis on? Did you have a co-writer? Did someone else publish something similar?
Casper, Wyoming, March 25th, 1988. The stretch of highway between Denver, Colorado and Billings, Montana is a lonely ribbon of asphalt that cuts through the heart of the Great Basin. For 18-year-old Lisa Marie Kimmel, it was a familiar route. On a Friday afternoon in March 1988, Lisa climbed into her black Honda CRX and began the 500-mile journey to visit her family. She was easy to spot. Her car bore a distinctive, personalized Montana license plate that read, Little Miss. The last confirmed sighting of Lisa alive was at 9:06 p.m. when a Wyoming highway patrolman clocked her doing 88 miles an hour near Douglas. She took her ticket and pulled back onto the dark highway, vanishing into the night. When she failed to arrive at her boyfriend's house in Cody, a frantic search began. Over 1,000 sightings of the Little Miss car was reported across the state, but they were all false. 8 days after she vanished, a fisherman found Lisa's body floating in the North Platte River near Casper. The autopsy revealed a nightmare of prolonged cruelty. Lisa hadn't died on the night she was pulled over. The evidence showed she'd been kept alive, bound and beaten for at least 6 days. Her captor eventually took her to the old government bridge, a rusted steel girder structure over the river, where he bludgeoned her and stabbed her repeatedly before tossing her over the side. For 14 years, the case remained one of the most haunting mysteries in the Mountain States. It was featured on Unsolved Mysteries, and Lisa's mother, Sheila, became a tireless advocate for her daughter. But without the car or a suspect, the trail went cold. It wasn't until 2002 that the emerging science of DNA profiling provided a name, Dale Wayne Eaton. Eaton was already in federal prison for a different kidnapping when the DNA from Lisa's rape kit hit. As investigators moved in, they received a tip from Eaton's former neighbors in the tiny town of Moneta. They remembered him digging a massive hole on his property years earlier. When the FBI excavated the site, they found what the entire state of Wyoming had been looking for. The black Honda CRX buried deep in the red dirt, with the original Lil Miss plates still attached.
Vistaprint, we know you've got that idea for your business, like the one that stops people mid-walk. But once that idea is on flags, vinyl banners, A-frame signs, it's so much more than an idea. Print your possible with code NEW20 for 20% off your first order at vistaprint.ca.
Attached. Eaton's fellow inmates later testified that he'd picked up Lisa after she offered him a ride, or perhaps after a staged encounter on the highway. In 2004, he was sentenced to death. However, in a twist of legal fate, his sentence was commuted to life in prison in 2022 after a series of strokes left him mentally incompetent. The impact of Lisa's murder reached far beyond one family. Investigators still suspect Eaton of being a prolific killer, potentially linked to the Great Basin murders and the 1997 disappearance of Amy Roe Bechtel. For the Kimmel family, justice took a visceral form. After winning Eaton's Moneta property in a wrongful death lawsuit, they gathered on what would have been Lisa's 36th birthday and burned every building on the land to the ground. Lisa Marie Kimmel's story is a sobering reminder of the vastness of the American West, a place where a predator can hide a car and a crime in the earth for decades. But it's also a testament to a mother's resolve and the relentless march of forensic science, ensuring that even under the weight of the Wyoming soil, the truth can eventually find its way back to the surface.
I remember that. Seeing the photos of them digging up her car.
Shoshone National Forest, Wyoming, July 24th, 1997. The Wind River Range is a cathedral of granite and pine, a place where the air is thin and the trails are grueling. For 24-year-old Amy Roe Bechtel, it was the perfect training ground. A world-class distance runner and Olympic hopeful, Amy was a record-breaking athlete who moved through the mountains with a discipline that few could match. But on a bright July afternoon in 1997, the mountain she spent time in every day became the site of one of the most exhaustive and baffling disappearances in American history. The timeline of Amy's final day was meticulously organized, much like the woman herself. After teaching a weightlifting class and running some errands in town, she headed toward the Loop Road in the Shoshone National Forest to map out a 10K race route. Her to-do list, found later in her car, had every item crossed off, except for one: go for a run.
Didn't I just
When
read
she
this
didn't
one?
return home to her husband, Steve, by 10 p.m., the alarm was raised. The search for Amy Bechtel was unprecedented. Over 200 elite climbers and federal agents scoured the forest. The FBI even utilized infrared sonars from the Air Force and requested satellite imagery from NASA and the Russian space station Mir to identify any vehicle movement on the remote mountain roads. But the result was a chilling zero. No footprints, no clothing fibers, and no sign of a struggle. Amy had simply vanished into the thin mountain air. Initially, the investigation turned inward. Detectives focused heavily on Amy's husband, Steve Bechtel. They pointed to dark, violent poetry found in his journals and his refusal to take a polygraph test of his red flags. The family grew suspicious, wondering if a domestic dispute had ended in tragedy. Steve maintained his innocence, claiming his journals were just fictional lyrics for a punk band and that he was miles away rock climbing at the time. Without a body or a crime scene, the case against him stalled, leaving a permanent rift between the family and the law. Years later, a much more sinister shadow emerged: Dale Wayne Eaton, who we talked about in the previous story. The man who would eventually be known as the Little Miss Killer was confirmed to be camping in the exact area where Amy vanished. Eaton was a predator with a proven ability to make evidence and people disappear. He'd kept Lisa Marie Kimmel captive for days before killing her and burying her car deep in the Wyoming soil. Investigators believe Amy's disappearance bears the hallmarks of a professional abduction. It happened fast and it was clean. The only thing missing from her car was her wallet, an unusual item for a runner to carry into the woods, unless she'd been lured or forced away from her vehicle. Despite Eaton's proximity and his violent history, he's refused to utter a single word about Amy Bechtel, taking his silence to his life sentence. Amy was declared legally dead in 2004, but in the town of Lander, she's a ghost case that never truly goes cold. Her story is the final haunting chapter of our journey through the Mountain States, a reminder that even the strongest, most disciplined among us can be made small by the vastness of the wilderness and the darkness of those who hide within it. The Mountain States stretch across millions of acres, 6 cases, 6 lives interrupted by the same brutal arithmetic.
Nice.
Isolation plus opportunity equals predation. Some killers were caught by a discarded napkin, a plate of hash browns, a child's courage. Others took their secrets to the grave. But the cases that remain open share one defining feature. Not a lack of evidence, but a lack of confession. The question is, what else are they still hiding?
You're so precious. You came out cute.
Nobody likes to be told what to do, except when someone says, "Hey, eat a Reese's!"
Let's see if we can get one more done tonight.
You're watching Northern Crimes.
I know.
Night settles over southern Oregon. The Rogue Valley lies quiet, framed by the Siskiyou Mountains to the south and the Cascades to the north and east. The city lights of Medford and Ashland flicker faintly against the darkened hills, while the rivers and highways that connect them carry faint echoes of stories long forgotten. Jackson County is known for its beauty, vineyards and forests, rugged trails, and old mining towns. Beneath the surface runs a history of disappearances, unsolved murders, and mysteries that defy explanation. From teenagers who vanished on road trips to veterans lost in the wilderness, from unexplained deaths along the Bear Creek Greenway to women who simply walked into the Oregon night and were never seen again. Each case reveals another layer of secrecy in a region long haunted by the unknown. For decades, investigators have searched these mountains and rivers, following leads and retracing steps. Each time, they've come up empty-handed. This is the true story of Oregon's Jackson County Cold Cases, a place where beauty meets darkness, and where the missing often stay missing. This is Northern Crimes.
I like this mold, but it's awful shallow at the edges. Do you have another option? Jesus.
1977, 17-year-old J. Calvin Pringle left his home in Medford, Oregon, with dreams of adventure and the open road ahead. Now, what should have been a straightforward trip with a friend became a disappearance that has never been solved, a case that's left investigators with more questions than answers for nearly 5 decades. Jay was a music-loving teenager who worked as a busboy at the Medford Greyhound station, and that's where he met 23-year-old Robert Harry Kellogg. Despite their 6-year age difference, the two struck up a friendship, and when Kellogg suggested a road trip to California, Jay's mother gave her blessing, even entrusting Kellogg with Jay's travel money, believing the older man would be more responsible with it.
Fool.
On April 19th, 1977, something strange happened. According to Kellogg, the two had reached Gardena, California, a suburb of Los Angeles known for its legal poker clubs and gambling scene. Kellogg claimed they had an argument at their motel, and Jay left with an unknown man, taking only a suitcase and a brown wool blanket. But Jay left behind all his money, a detail that immediately raised doubts about Kellogg's story. The explanation really defied logic. A 17-year-old, hundreds of miles from home, walking away from a dispute and leaving his savings behind? Investigators found it difficult to believe, and suspicion deepened when Kellogg drove straight to Las Vegas after Jay's disappearance and gambled away all of the teenager's money before returning back to Oregon alone.
When your teeth are sensitive, even biting into a popsicle can hurt. Try new Sensodyne Clinical Repair.
Alone. When Jay's mother reported him missing, police focused on Kellogg. His account was inconsistent. He agreed to take 2 polygraph tests, but failed to appear for either. And shortly after police questioning, he fled Oregon for Washington State, where he remained for the rest of his life. Years later, investigators learned that Kellogg's online alias was, quote, last man to know. The name itself raised unsettling questions, like last man to know what exactly. And getting back to Gardena, the site of Jay's disappearance, well, it was a really unusual destination. It was the only city in Los Angeles County where card games were legal, a haven for gamblers, hustlers, and organized crime figures. For someone drawn to gambling, it was a dangerous place to bring a teenager. Even more unsettling, on the same day Jay vanished, April 19th, 1977, a gang-related murder took place in Gardena involving groups identified by blue bandanas. Well, Jay was last seen wearing one around his head. Whether coincidence or connection, it was another detail investigators couldn't ignore. The evidence eventually revealed Kellogg's pattern of deception. He'd already spent Jay's money before claiming the boy left voluntarily. The timeline suggests Jay may have discovered the theft, leading to a confrontation that ended in violence, a dispute Kellogg would later describe as a simple disagreement. Despite extensive investigation, Jay's body was never located. Kellogg maintained his innocence until his death in 2011 at age 58, taking any remaining truth with him. The case remains officially unsolved, though detectives have long suspected Kellogg's involvement. So, what happened to Jay Pringle?
Yeah.
Did a trusted friend betray him over stolen money, or was he caught in something far more dangerous? Sometimes the most haunting mysteries aren't about what we don't know, they're about what we can no longer prove.
So why couldn't they interrogate him? Much better.
On May 31st, 1995, 35-year-old Danny Lee Kelly disappeared from Gold Hill, Oregon, under very strange circumstances. What began as a call for help about his erratic behavior ended with a man vanishing into the darkness near the Rogue River, in a mystery that remains unsolved. Danny was known for his warmth and charisma, a man who played guitar effortlessly and made friends wherever he went. But by the spring of 1995, those close to him noticed something was off. Recently divorced and back in Oregon after time in Washington State, Danny seemed increasingly unstable, maybe even unwell. That night, he was staying with two friends in Gold Hill when they contacted his family, concerned about his behavior. They said he was acting strange, confused, paranoid, and needed medical attention. Danny's mother, Lavina, arrived with her daughter, Kara, and Kara's boyfriend, Tim, to check on him. They found him in alarming condition. His skin appeared yellow and swollen. He was talking to people who weren't there, and he seemed deeply paranoid. He also had scratches across his arms and blood on his scalp, injuries no one could explain. As they tried to convince him to go to the hospital, tensions rose. Tim told him firmly to get in the car. Danny raised his hands, said he was tired of being told what to do, and suddenly bolted straight toward the Rogue River in the dark. Kara and Tim chased after him through the brush, lost sight of him. Moments later, they heard a sound, either a splash or a gunshot. It was never determined which. The search began immediately. Police, cadaver dogs, and volunteers combed the riverbanks for days, but found nothing. Investigators noted that most who enter the Rogue River are eventually recovered. Danny was not. His physical condition raised further questions. The yellowing skin, bloating, and low tolerance for alcohol suggested liver failure or another serious illness. His sister later said that while he'd once been a heavy drinker, he now appeared intoxicated after only a few beers. Signs that something serious was happening to his body. Whether his disappearance was voluntary or the result of foul play remains unclear. Some in the family believe Danny may have fled to escape legal and financial troubles, possibly heading to Mexico, where his mother later lived. Others, including his son Shane, are convinced something more sinister occurred that night. Years later, during a renewed investigation, Tim, Kara's boyfriend, claimed he'd seen Danny again after he ran off, and that Danny told him he, quote,
just didn't want to be found.
But Tim's history of drug use and his later death from addiction cast mystery around his statement.
Easy to style, easy to wear. Shop trendy prescription glasses for men and women at Vermouth.
Transform my home office from this to this under 30 minutes. The secret to my perfect work from home setup: 3 simple upgrades from Canadian Tire. First, my desk. Every great workspace starts with the right desk. The Canvas desk is a full-size desk that gives me a dedicated space to focus. The 2 built-in drawers keep essentials organized and clutter hidden. It's the kind of desk that makes working from home feel better. Second, my chair. A comfortable office chair is such a must-have for me. The Canvas office chair features adjustable height and a 360 swivel. It helps me move easily, stay supported, and work comfortably throughout the day. And third, my lighting. No setup feels complete without the right lighting. The Noma West lamp is multifunctional and stand that brightens my workspace while charging my phone. With adjustable brightness and light tones, I can easily adapt it to any task. To complete the space, the Hatch Whistler 3 and this white wire basket. 2 simple essentials I use every day. Don't wait, visit your local Canadian Tire to update your workspace.
Decades later, Danny's family still waits for answers. His son Shane has devoted years to uncovering the truth, determined to understand what happened on that riverbank. Nearly 3 decades later, Danny Kelly's disappearance remains unsolved, and his case highlights the complexity of missing person investigations when families are involved. Memories conflict, and physical evidence disappears into the murky waters of the Rogue River.
Okay, I think he's done. He needs to dry.
In November 1998, 40-year-old Cheryl K. Sayedine disappeared from Ashland, Oregon, under circumstances that to this day remain unclear. Even the date of her last sighting is uncertain, with some reports placing it on November 1st, others on the 17th. The truth is, there's very little information known about this case. It's just not been well publicized. What is known is that a woman who regularly contacted her family, no matter where she was, suddenly stopped communicating altogether. Cheryl's life, it hadn't been easy. She battled alcoholism, endured domestic violence, and often lived on the move. Her travels took her from Ohio to Texas, then to California, before she finally settled in Oregon's Rogue Valley. She sometimes used other surnames, Foreman, Cross, or De La Croix, making her difficult to trace. The accounts surrounding her final days differ sharply. One version places her last at a medical appointment in mid-November following foot surgery. Another claims she was last seen near Old Highway 99 outside of Ashland, close to the California border. These conflicting reports have long complicated the investigation and obscured the timeline of her disappearance. But one fact is undisputed. Cheryl wasn't reported missing until July 1999, potentially 8 months after she disappeared. Her transient lifestyle had initially led family members to believe she might be traveling again, but as holidays came and went without the usual phone calls, concern turned to alarm. It was completely out of character for Cheryl not to reach out during Christmas or family milestones. Investigators later learned that Cheryl had been in a volatile relationship in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, and when police questioned her boyfriend, he refused to cooperate, behavior that quickly made him a person of interest. Cheryl was 5 foot 2 inches tall and about 115 pounds, with brown hair, hazel eyes, and several identifying marks. A 3-inch scar on her torso, a 20-inch scar across her back, a tattoo of horses around her left ankle, and a star tattoo on her left wrist. Yet, despite these distinctive features in the public...
I got 1, 2, 3, 4 things done. Not my best record, but better than nothing. Alright, kitten check. Oh my goodness. You ready to go to bed? You ready to go to bed? Alrighty. You guys have a good night.